Oh, Sydney, I love you so. Bring me your weary, and I will give them rest. Bring me your sad, and I will give them laughter. Bring me your broken-hearted, and I will give you the rose. Some say love is a physician, never there when you're in need. Some say love is like a surgeon who cares nothing if you bleed.
I say love, it is a flower, and you, it's only seed. It's the heart afraid of breaking that never learns to dance. It's the dream afraid of waking that never takes a chance. It's the one who won't be taken, who cannot seem to give, and the soul afraid of dying that never learns to live.
Well, you could say it was an arranged marriage. I was appointed director of the intensive therapy unit in late 1976, and Malcolm was appointed without any consultation to me because I hadn't taken up my position, in part by Ted Morgan, who's the director of anaesthetics. Now, all I knew about Malcolm was that he'd trained as an anaesthetist in New Zealand and as an intensivist and the doyen of intensive care departments at Royal Adelaide Hospital. He was a New Zealander. Well, the only New Zealanders I'd ever met were generally urbane, cultured people, including a couple of former All Blacks that I knew. Now, Malcolm had been described to me by Ted Morgan as a hail fellow, bluff in outlook, but I had absolutely no idea what I was going to get, and it was a bit of a shock. He was irreverent, sometimes crude, always entertaining, always a laugh, and we quickly knew that we'd struck gold with Malcolm because of his intensive care skills and the fact that he got on so well with patients and with staff.
The reason that Malcolm actually originally came to North Shore, as I understand it, was that North Shore had one of the few monkey laboratories in the country, and Malcolm was at that time very interested in doing some research related to anaphylaxis in relation to anaesthesia. So he came to North Shore and was appointed to the staff of the intensive care in the Department of Anaesthesia, and he set up what became really quite an amazing establishment to research various aspects of anaphylaxis in relation to anaesthesia. And for this he's been world renowned, and the laboratory that he set up has been very well acknowledged around the world and in various awards and so on. And this was in part at least the basis of his award of AO in the Order of Australia.
I first had contact with Malcolm when someone suggested I might like to apply for a job at Royal North Shore Hospital. I was a consultant in Oxford at the time and looking for a more fulfilling job, and our contact was by telephone, and it was in the days when email really hadn't been established. And when I got to know Malcolm, I realised that his apparent disinterest in my concerns about moving my entire family 12,000 miles and resigning from a fairly prestigious job, was not really disinterested. It was just that Malcolm's a big picture person. He doesn't really appear to focus on those small details, like throwing away your job and moving your family. And then we decided I should come to Sydney and work for 4 weeks so we could find out whether we liked each other. And my introduction to Malcolm was when Jane went into his office and said, "Dr. Finfer's here to see you." And I just flown 12,000 miles, and I could hear Malcolm's response, which was, "Who the fuck's Dr. Finfer?" And that was the start of a great relationship, really. So then we decided we did like each other, and I've worked in a few intensive care units, including in North America, and what you don't realise when you go into a unit after it's established is how difficult it is to build up a unit. And clearly Malcolm, along with Ray, had built a fantastic unit here, and that was obvious to me within a few minutes. And what was even more obvious was that everyone liked working here. They liked working with Malcolm, and he set the tone for the unit, which was, I guess, best summed up as work hard, play hard. Everyone was essentially happy, people got on, you saw people smiling, laughing, having a joke, but at the same time delivering excellent care. And that's something that comes from the top.
I remember having a patient who was quite unwell, and we were trying to put a central line in, and everybody had had a go at trying to put this central line in. You know, the junior resident, senior, and then a senior registrar had all sorts of difficulty. And Malcolm walked in and said to me, "Are you ready?" And put one glove on, and without even touching the patient, just picked up the central line and just with one hand just slid it straight in, and there you go, it's done. And it was a perfect spot, perfect position, like no one else could do. Malcolm did this sort of thing all the time. Had an amazing sense of wit. He would always follow his round with a joke, and left a real presence. That he's kind of felt like there has been a real father figure in the room that had looked after everybody, and the patients were sorted, and everyone was happy, and everyone knew exactly what they were doing. But you always knew that he had your back as well, and that if you had a problem or you didn't think things were right, that if you phoned Malcolm at any time, it could be 4 o'clock in the morning, and if you phoned Malcolm, you'd always know that he would always have your back. He'd tell you how it was, but he'd also follow it with a joke. And one of the most amazing clinicians I think I've ever worked with.
I can recall when we had a meeting with IM&T down in Malcolm's office, and a whole series of the IT people came down, and there was a long, or about 30-minute discussion, a very technical discussion about where the unit was heading in terms of its computing. And the IT people spoke of the network architecture, they spoke of routers and switches, they spoke of operating systems and operating system debuggers, and also spoke of VLANs and LANs and WANs. And then at the end of it, we looked up at Malcolm and said, "Well, what do you think, Malcolm?" And he looked up and he said, "There's only one word I understood of all of that, and that's bugger."
One major thing with Malcolm is his respect for nursing. He always loved the nurses, and I recently saw him and I said, "Oh, how's it going not being here?" And he said, "I never knew how much I would miss the nurses, the patients and the families." And I think a lot of people didn't realise that about him, and just how clever he was and how sort of sympathetic, and he was a great leader really, and you could always go to him.
You're talking to her, Mary, and she's just right to be. Identical, remember we're identical, and she may be.
If tonight, the story that all brings us here tonight, there is a hero, and I'll talk about him later. There are also a group of heroines. 3 of them are here tonight, and they are the nurses who choose to work in burns units or work in intensive care units. There is no one in this room who does not earn 4 times as much as a senior nurse who works in an intensive care unit in New South Wales. They are the most special people you could ever meet. They are counsellors, they are nurses, they look after my mental health, they look after an incredible number of things. There are only 3 of them here tonight because, of course, they can't afford to come. No matter what you think of doctors, there can be no one in this room who doesn't owe something to a nurse. Please, could you join with me in thanking them?
In 2009, North Care gave me the opportunity to study a critical care certificate at UTS.
I have come so far since 2008. I've had so many opportunities given to me, and really it's all come down to the fact that I was able to do my postgraduate degree in critical care from UTS. I was able to move around to different wards and different hospitals, really opened my eyes to what I wanted to do.
Now I've been probed to think wider, yeah, and I think in summary, you know, it's allowed me to be a bit more proactive in my care of my patient, you know, and ask questions. Why is this happening to my patient? And hence, what can I do about it?
In 2010, I got a scholarship from North Care, and that allowed me to complete the graduate certificate in critical care nursing. And since completing that course through the University of Technology in Sydney, it's just created a whole nother dimension to what we do every day. It's filled in so many gaps. There's still a lot of gaps to be filled, but there's plenty more time to study.
So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, North Care. Thank you very, very much. I think you allow individuals, ICU nurses, to, I guess, fly.
To describe Malcolm is somewhat difficult because he has so many facets to his personality. But I did that little thing that we sometimes do where we take the name and we give a descriptor. For example, Malcolm, M. M is for magnanimous. He always made everybody feel good about themselves. A, most people wouldn't agree with this, but I found him adorable. L, I also found him lovable. He had a gruff exterior at times, but deep down inside, you had to love him. He was extremely creative, and that's what the C is for. At an intensive care conference, he created a bingo game where no one could win. He had everybody going for at least a half an hour, with plenty of people saying, I've won, and he's, no, you haven't. Anyway, O is for open. He always gave everybody mutual respect and mutual trust. L, he was the greatest of listeners and would always have time when you needed to talk to him. And lastly, he was a motivator and an amazing mentor. And Malcolm's famous words were, "Trust me, I'm a doctor."
There is a story that I remember Malcolm recounting to me about being called at home when he was dealing with someone over the phone. Someone had been admitted to the unit with a funnel web envenomation, and he jumped out of bed to come running in and was heard to say, "No one's going to die on my patch from the bite of something that's smaller than my little finger." And that was the beginning of an interest in particularly funnel web envenomation.
Could your worst animal nightmare be one of the world's deadliest spiders? The safety of your own home shattered by an agonizing spider bite.
Dr. Fisher explained to me what was going on with Gordon. Explained to me also about the anti-venom.
Gordon Wheatley's only chance was to be the first human guinea pig for an experimental antidote to the powerful venom of the Australian funnel web spider.
The lungs flood with fluid. The person progressively becomes short of oxygen. The syndrome is like an overdose of exercise.
heart rate can go up so high it's almost out of control. A child's pulse rate can go up to 240 per minute.
Up to 1981, there were 13 recorded fatalities.
The circulation will eventually begin to fail, the blood pressure become low, and the patient may die. He was transferred from Ryde because Ryde did not have a major intensive care unit, and Dr. Burgess realised that this was a very serious problem. It was obvious that he was severely envenomated.
Gordon, Malcolm Fisher.
He had pulmonary edema, his blood pressure was through the roof.
Okay, let's get him inside.
He had fixed dilated pupils.
Can we get you to make sure that all vitals are hooked up, ready to go?
He was severely acidotic.
His family still didn't realize that Gordon was dying.
The family, Gwen particularly, had no idea of that close to being dead.
The Royal North Shore Hospital had only just received the very first trial samples of spider antivenom. Dr. Fisher was deciding whether to try the experimental antidote as he worked on stabilizing Gordon's violent symptoms.
We, at that stage, had approval to trial the antivenom which Struan had made.
Conventional treatment had failed. Gordon's body was shutting down, but Dr. Fisher believed there was one last chance.
Arriving at the hospital, I was summoned to intensive care.
Mrs. Wheatley?
Yes.
We need to discuss your husband.
Dr. Fisher explained to me what was going on with Gordon and his condition, and explained to me also about the antivenom.
There's a new antivenom that's never been tested on humans before.
She didn't know anything about the new treatment, of course, it had never been published up to then.
Gordon would be the first. We don't know the side effects, but we think it's his best chance.
And I had to give my consent.
We need your consent to administer.
Well, I think it was a big decision to put on a lady.
Is it that serious?
Yes.
And I can remember saying to him, well, what would you do in a case like this? What would you do? And he said, I think I would sign and give my consent.
I'd give it to him.
He has that ability to hold a crowd in the palm of his hand and to communicate things and get away with things that us mere mortals wouldn't even try, let alone get away with. After I'd been here for a while, he was asked to go on TV and talk about the thorny issue of withholding and withdrawing treatment.
Let me ask you something that's pretty sensitive, and I want you to be as honest as you can within the framework of the law.
Yeah.
Have you ever killed anybody?
Oh, yes, yes. If by a conscious act which expedites somebody's demise, yes, I do that every week, and so do my colleagues. I mean, legally, that's killing them. It's, but we don't consider that that is killing them. We consider that is allowing them to die with dignity. Our age population's increasing, it's surviving longer, and it's losing its marbles.
That debate on patient rights to treatment is already well underway in medical circles, like this gathering of intensive care workers in Sydney.
But our ICUs are full of old people receiving treatment that would be against their wishes at the request of their children.
But there's frustration here that the nation's intensive care units are being left to make the hard decisions no one else in the system is prepared to make.
And maybe it's time for a realistic discussion in society about what people are entitled to expect. But the politicians are certainly not going to lead this because it's something they're very afraid of.
As we well know, as time has gone on, that end of life has become an important part of intensive care, because a large percentage of patients that now go to intensive care are end of lifers. So it's, he recognised early the importance, and Ray Raper, of course, the looking after, you know, these patients and their relatives, and they did a lot to, you know, make this part of the routine treatment of intensive care.
One of Malcolm's claims to fame, only after many years of not claiming it at all, was being the author of Retractor. One of the greatest articles I ever read that he had written was a piece called How to Abuse a Nurse. And it was all about a nurse who had made a fairly large mistake with a patient patient survived, so that was okay. His abuse of the nurse was nothing more than to give her a hug. She had already abused herself so harshly over the mistake that she had made that he believed that how to abuse a nurse was giving her a hug. And to me, that said it all about Malcolm.
You should have been an author. You know, the stuff he wrote as Retractor was all, you know, captivating and to the point and funny. And perhaps in his retirement he can pick up the pen again and start doing that.
When I first started in intensive care in the 1970s, in New York and then in Miami, most American intensivists didn't know really that intensive care medicine went on outside of the United States. When we first started hearing about intensive care medicine in Europe and down under, Malcolm Fisher was intensive care medicine in Australia.
He can relate to anybody. And you know, when we were overseas, you know, people like myself and Bob Wright is sort of, you know, a fellow who's up front, no question. But Malcolm would chat to anybody and become, you know, make them feel at ease. And so he quickly established friendships all throughout. Myself and Jeff Clark, you know, certainly wouldn't be like that. We're a bit backward in that regard. But no, he established an enormous amount of connections with both Europe and America, of course.
I don't know whether you even had this series, The West Wing, over here. And this is Josh, and those of you who saw it will remember Josh got shot. And Leo, the head of the chief of staff of the White House, sent 2 psychologists to see Josh, who is a superb program about post-traumatic stress disorder. And afterwards, when Josh thanked Leo told him the story of a man who fell in a hole. And he was stuck and he was panicking. And a priest walked past and wrote a little prayer on a piece of paper and put it down the hole, and he was still down the hole. And a doctor walked past and wrote a prescription on a piece of paper and put it down the hole. And he was still down the hole. And a colleague walked past, saw him, and jumped in the hole. And he said, "You're crazy. Now we're both in the hole." And the colleague said, "No, I've been down this hole and I know the way out."
I think for me, the essence of Malcolm is really expressed in the conversations I used to have with him when I was a senior registrar, and in the many conversations we've had since then, in bars and pubs and dinners and restaurants and all sorts of things. When I was a registrar, I know if I had a problem, if there was something I didn't understand, I'd go into his office and we'd put our feet up on the desk and we'd talk. And I'd come out of it sometime later, not with an answer, but with a much, much better understanding of the problem and a much better idea of how to get the answer or where to go forward. And that's been the case with Malcolm all my life, that he's been my mentor, he's been my friend, he's been a fantastic sounding board for ideas and for worries and concerns.
This is one of the great intensivists, Lee Thompson, who was a mentor for me and a friend to me. And he wrote this to me in the 80s, and I say this to you now, that those of you who don't fear change, those of you who perceive the future, and those who communicate are the only ones to lead us from this wilderness to what can be a very wonderful or a very bad future. And I wish you all that very wonderful future. And finally, to those of you who have shared my journey, people here whose paths have crossed, a few of you even jumped in the hole, and particularly those who, when multiple sclerosis or the drink or a combination has meant I was having difficulty getting home, have made sure I got home. I thank you very sincerely. It has been a blast. It has been a privilege.
And in the pubs of Sydney where the doctors go to drink, they tell the story of this hapless Joe. And as they put their LA down, they sometimes stop and think, God, please let me go quickly when I go. And let me go on the golf course for an act of illicit love, or aspirate in a fit of drunken laughter. I know the docs are evil, and I'm sure I'll go to hell. But not before I die, God, make it after.
Like so many other people who have made comments to me in the context of retirement, I wish you all the best.
Malcolm, I love you to pieces, and you will be sorely missed.
It's been a great ride both of us have had in our careers in intensive care medicine, and for me it's been a true delight, a true honor to be both your colleague and friend.
Congratulations on your retirement. We'd like to thank you for everything you've done for us and for intensive care, because what you've done for intensive care is inspire a generation.
You've been an inspiration to me and my generation and generations that followed. When you finish your retirement, there'll be a vacuum. Your glorious irreverence and your pragmatic approach to intensive care have led the way forward for the last 30 years.
Have a great retirement, Malcolm. It'll be a quiet place without you.
Start spreading the news. I'm leaving today. I want to be a part of it. New York, New York. These vagabond shoes, they are longing to stray right through the very heart of it. New York, New York. I want to wake up in a city that doesn't sleep and find